3 months ago, I stood behind a police cruiser in the cool California night, watching my parents destroy a living room that wasn't mine. The baseball bat rose and fell with methodical fury, shattering a television screen, splintering a coffee table, tearing through cushions like they were made of paper. My mother's face was twisted with rage I had never seen before, and my father, a man who once taught me to ride a bicycle with infinite patience, swung that bat like he was trying to erase something from existence. Me perhaps. The memory of me. The daughter who dared to say no. They thought it was my house. They had come to teach me a lesson, to make me pay for what they called my betrayal, my selfishness, my abandonment of family. But the address they had was wrong, outdated, belonging to a stranger who would soon file charges that would unravel what remained of my family's already fragile world. As the red and blue lights painted the scene in surreal colors, as officers moved in to restrain the two people who had raised me, I felt something unexpected wash over me. Not satisfaction, not even relief at first. It was clarity, pure and startling. I had spent 29 years believing that family was everything, that blood created unbreakable bonds, that loyalty to those who raised you was the highest virtue. But standing there in the darkness, watching the consequences of their choices play out in real time, I finally understood a truth that had taken me far too long to learn. What I had lost that night 5 years ago, when I walked away from that dinner table, wasn't my family. It was a burden I had carried my entire life, a weight I had mistaken for love, obligation I had confused with connection. And what I had gained, slowly and painfully over the years that followed, was something far more precious. Freedom. The freedom to build a life on my own terms, to choose who deserved a place in my story, to understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who will never see your worth. This is the story of how I lost my family and found myself. It's about the price of saying no, the cost of setting boundaries, and the unexpected peace that comes from letting go of people who were never truly holding on to you. It's about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose, between the life others expect you to live and the life you dare to claim as your own. So let me take you back to where it all began, to a moment that seemed insignificant at the time but would ultimately change everything. It started with a dream, a modest one by most standards, but one that was entirely mine.
Every story deserves to be heard. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Your voice keeps the past alive.
Emily Chen had never been the type to dream big. While her older sister Rachel talked about opening restaurant chains and building empires, Emily's ambitions were quieter, more tangible, rooted in a desire for something she had never quite felt growing up: security. Not just financial security, though that mattered too, but the deeper kind, the kind that comes from having a space in the world that belongs only to you, that no one can take away or claim as their own. For 4 years, Emily worked her primary job as a software developer during the week and took on freelance projects every weekend. While her co-workers spent their Saturdays at breweries and their Sundays hiking coastal trails, Emily sat at her desk writing code, debugging systems, building applications for clients who needed work done quickly and quietly. She learned to function on 5 hours of sleep, to say no to invitations without feeling guilty, to keep her eyes fixed on a goal that felt both impossibly distant and vitally necessary. Her apartment during those years was a testament to her discipline. She bought her clothes at thrift stores, cycled through the same 7 meals to minimize grocery costs, and kept her entertainment budget at exactly $0 per month. The library became her cinema, her concert hall, her escape. She read novels on Friday nights and returned them on Monday mornings, never paying a single late fee. Her phone was 2 generations old, her laptop 3. She cut her own hair in front of the bathroom mirror, watching tutorial videos on her outdated device, getting better at it with each attempt. Her co-workers thought she was eccentric, perhaps even a bit sad. Her few friends worried about her, gently suggesting that she was missing out on her 20s, that life was meant to be lived, not just endured. But Emily knew something they didn't. She understood in a way that went bone deep, that freedom had a price tag, and she was willing to pay it in increments of time and temporary discomfort. The money accumulated slowly, then faster. 5,000 became 10, 10 became 25. She opened a high-yield savings account and watched the interest compound with the same satisfaction others might feel watching a garden grow. She learned about closing costs and property taxes, studied mortgage rates with the intensity of a scholar preparing for comprehensive exams, joined online forums where first-time homebuyers shared advice and warnings and hard-won wisdom. By her 24th birthday, she had $50,000. By her 26th, 70. And 3 months after she turned 27, her bank account showed a balance of $85,643. It was enough. Barely enough in California's ruthless housing market, but enough to start looking, to start imagining that the abstract goal might become concrete reality. She found it in a neighborhood that was still transitioning, not quite gentrified but showing signs of future promise. A small condo, just under 900 square feet, on the second floor of a building constructed in the 1980s that had been recently renovated. The kitchen was tiny, the bathroom fixtures were basic, and the view from the single-bedroom window showed nothing but the parking lot and a strip of sky. But the bones were good, the price was right, and most importantly, it would be hers. The negotiation process was excruciating. The seller's agent was aggressive, pushing for multiple offers, trying to start a bidding war. Emily's agent, a pragmatic woman named Margaret who had taken pity on this obviously anxious first-time buyer, coached her through every step. They offered exactly what Emily could afford, not $1 more, and included a letter that Emily had written and rewritten 17 times, explaining who she was and what this purchase meant to her. The letter worked. Or perhaps the seller was simply tired of the process, ready to move on. Either way, 3 weeks later, Emily sat in a title company office signing document after document, her hand cramping, her heart racing, until finally Margaret slid the keys across the table and said, "Congratulations! You're a homeowner." Emily didn't cry, though she had expected to. Instead, she felt a calm settle over her that was almost spiritual in its intensity. She drove to the condo immediately, let herself in with the new keys, and stood in the empty living room as afternoon light slanted through the windows. The space echoed with possibility, with promise, with the simple radical fact of ownership. She spent her first night there on an air mattress, without furniture, without television, with nothing but a camping lamp and a sense of accomplishment so profound it kept her awake until dawn. This was hers. Not her parents', not her landlord's, not anyone's but her own. For the first time in her adult life, she understood what it meant to have roots, to have a foundation that couldn't be pulled out from under her with 30 days' notice and a lease termination letter. In the weeks that followed, she furnished the place slowly, carefully, with pieces from estate sales and online marketplaces. She painted the bedroom a soft gray that made her feel calm, hung curtains she had hemmed herself, bought plants that didn't require much light or attention. She created rituals. Coffee on the small balcony every Saturday morning, reading in the corner of the living room every evening before bed, cooking simple meals in the kitchen that was too small but was entirely her own. Her family knew about the purchase, of course. She had mentioned it in passing at a Sunday dinner, expecting perhaps congratulations, maybe some parental pride. Instead, her mother had pursed her lips and said, "Must be nice to be so selfish with your money," and her father had simply grunted, already scrolling through something on his phone. Only Rachel had shown interest, but it was the wrong kind of interest, the calculating kind that made Emily immediately regret saying anything at all. But Emily pushed those reactions aside, told herself that not every achievement required external validation, that she had done this for herself and that was enough. She changed her mailing address, set up utilities in her name, learned how HOA fees worked and why the water heater made that particular clanking sound every morning at 6:15. She became a homeowner not just in title but in practice, in the daily small responsibilities and small joys that ownership entailed. For 6 months, life was better than it had ever been. She got a promotion at work, a recognition of the dedication that had driven her weekend freelancing in the first place. Her salary increased by 18%, and for the first time since college, she had discretionary income, money she didn't have to immediately allocate to savings or mortgage payments. She joined a gym, started seeing a therapist who helped her understand some of the anxiety patterns she had developed over years of financial stress, even went on a few dates through an app her coworkers had convinced her to download. Life felt stable, manageable, like she had finally figured out the algorithm for being an adult, for building something sustainable and good. She should have known, of course, that stability is often just the pause before disruption, that peace can make you complacent, vulnerable to the chaos that always seems to find a way back in. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March. Her mother's voice on the other end of the line, unusually bright, unusually warm. "Emily, sweetheart, we haven't seen you in so long. Come to dinner this Sunday. Rachel has something she wants to share with the family." Emily almost said no. She had been enjoying the distance, the space that had opened up in her life since she had stopped attending every family obligation. But something in her mother's tone, a fragility she couldn't quite identify, made her agree. Just this once, she told herself. Just to maintain some basic level of connection. She had no way of knowing that this decision, this single moment of yielding to old patterns, would set in motion everything that followed. The Chen family home looked exactly as Emily remembered it, unchanged in all the ways that mattered and somehow smaller than her memory had preserved. The same beige siding that needed repainting, the same gravel driveway that crunched under her tires, the same ceramic garden gnome her father had bought at a yard sale 15 years ago and never moved. She sat in her car for a moment before going in, steeling herself with breathing exercises her therapist had taught her, reminding herself that she was an adult with her own home and her own life, that she could leave whenever she wanted. Her mother answered the door with an embrace that lasted slightly too long, the kind of hug that felt more like an assessment than affection. "You've lost weight," her mother said, which was both untrue and typical, the opening move in a game Emily had never learned to play well. "Are you eating enough? You work too much." Inside, the house smelled like it always had, like soy sauce and incense and something vaguely medicinal that Emily had never been able to identify. Her father was in his usual chair, watching a soccer match on the television with the volume too high. He nodded at her without getting up, a greeting that contained neither warmth nor hostility, just the baseline indifference she had come to expect. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later in a new car, something sleek and European that probably cost more than Emily's annual salary. She swept in wearing designer clothes, carrying a leather portfolio, radiating the kind of confidence that Emily had always envied and slightly distrusted. Behind her came Mark, her husband of 3 years, a real estate agent who smiled constantly and meant it never. "Little sister," Rachel exclaimed, though Emily was only 2 years younger and hadn't been little since middle school. "Look at you. Still dressing like you're going to a job interview at a library." Emily had learned not to engage with Rachel's commentary on her appearance, her choices, her general approach to life. She smiled tightly and moved into the dining room, where her mother had already laid out enough food for twice their number, as if abundance could compensate for whatever else was lacking. They ate in relative quiet for the first 15 minutes, making small talk about nothing that mattered. Her father's golf game, which was getting worse. Her mother's book club, which was reading something about a woman who moved to Italy and found herself, a plot her mother described with a wistfulness that Emily found depressing. Mark's latest real estate deal, which he detailed with the enthusiasm of someone who thought everyone found commission structures fascinating. Then Rachel cleared her throat, the sound deliberate, a call to attention. She reached for her portfolio, pulling out a tablet that she set up at the center of the table with practiced efficiency. "Okay, family, I've been waiting to share this with all of you. I think you're going to be very excited." What followed was a presentation that Rachel had clearly spent considerable time preparing. Slides appeared on the tablet screen, full of charts and projected revenue streams and market analysis that used terms like disruptive potential and scalable framework and synergistic opportunities. Emily watched her parents' faces, saw the confusion they tried to hide behind nodding and occasional murmurs of agreement. The business concept itself was actually interesting, Emily had to admit. Rachel wanted to reboot a small chain of donut shops that had been popular in the 90s but had gone bankrupt during the recession. She had found the trademark, contacted the original owner's family, secured the rights to the recipes and branding. Her plan was to launch in trendy neighborhoods, marketing them as nostalgic comfort food with a modern aesthetic, leveraging social media and influencer partnerships to build buzz before expanding to multiple locations. "The initial investment needed is $180,000, Rachel said, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality, like she was pitching to venture capitalists rather than family. I've already secured commitments for $80,000 from Mark's parents and from some friends who believe in the vision. But I need the rest to lock in the first location, to build out the space properly, to do this right. Emily saw it coming before Rachel even turned to look at her. She felt the weight of expectation settling over the table like a fog, saw her parents straighten in their chairs, their faces taking on identical expressions of hope and calculation. "Emily," Rachel said, and her voice softened, became almost pleading. "I know you've been saving. I know you just bought that condo. And I'm so proud of you for that, really I am. But this is a family opportunity. This is something we could all build together. And I need my sister. I need you to believe in me." The silence that followed was heavy with presumption. Emily looked around the table, at faces that expected only one answer, that had already moved past her consent to planning how they would celebrate. She understood in that moment that this entire dinner had been orchestrated, that the warmth in her mother's voice on the phone had been tactical, that she had been invited not as a daughter but as a solution to someone else's problem. "No," Emily said quietly. The word hung in the air like something physical, like she had thrown a glass against the wall. "What?" Rachel's smile didn't falter, but something behind her eyes changed. "I said no. I'm not investing in this." Her mother leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone she had used when Emily was a child refusing to finish her vegetables. "Emily, don't be hasty. This is your sister. This is family. I understand that. But my answer is still no." Rachel's smile finally disappeared. "Do you not believe in me? Is that what this is? You think I'm going to fail? It's not about belief. It's about the fact that this is my money, that I worked extremely hard for it, and that I'm not comfortable investing it in a business venture that carries substantial risk." "Risk?" Mark spoke up for the first time since the presentation began, his salesman voice kicking in. "Emily, every business has risk, but Rachel's done the research, the market analysis is solid, and I'm not interested in debating the merits of the business plan. I'm simply saying that I'm not investing. I wish Rachel the best with it, truly I do, but my answer is no." Her father set down his chopsticks with deliberate slowness, a gesture Emily recognized as the precursor to one of his rare pronouncements. "You have money sitting in a bank doing nothing. Your sister has a dream that could benefit this entire family. You're being selfish, Emily. You're being cold. I'm being responsible with money I earned. There's a difference. You earned it from a job we encouraged you to pursue," her mother said, her voice rising. "From an education we helped pay for. You act like you did everything yourself, but you seem to forget that this family made sacrifices for you." Emily felt something crack inside her, a patience she didn't know she had been maintaining. "You paid for 2 years of community college before I took out loans for the rest. That's the extent of the sacrifices you made for my education. And I've been financially independent since I was 20 years old. So no, I don't forget, because there's actually very little to remember." Rachel stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her eyes were bright with tears that Emily suspected were at least partially strategic. "I can't believe you. I came here excited to share something with my family, and you're throwing it back in my face. Do you know how much courage it took to ask you? How hard it was to admit I needed help? I'm sorry you're disappointed, but you're not sorry. You're sitting there in your comfortable little life, your comfortable little condo, and you don't care about anyone but yourself. You never have. That's not fair, Rachel." "Fair?" Rachel's voice broke, and real emotion flooded her face now, anger and hurt and something that looked like genuine betrayal. "You want to talk about fair? I've been there for you your entire life. When you were bullied in school, when you were too shy to make friends, when you needed someone to believe in you, that was me, Emily. That was always me. And now, when I need you, you can't even." She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she grabbed her portfolio and walked out of the dining room, her footsteps quick and hard against the floor. Mark followed after a moment's hesitation, pausing only to give Emily a look of profound disappointment, like she had failed some basic test of humanity. Emily's parents didn't leave. They sat across from her in terrible silence, their faces settling into expressions she had never seen before, coldness that felt absolute, final. "If you won't help your sister," her father said, his voice perfectly controlled, perfectly even, "then you're not the daughter we thought we raised." "You don't mean that," Emily said, but she wasn't sure of anything anymore. Her mother stood, began clearing dishes with sharp, angry movements. "You should go, Emily. You've made your position very clear." Emily drove home that night in a kind of shock, her hands shaking on the wheel, her mind replaying the conversation in loops, trying to find the moment where she could have responded differently, wondering if she had been wrong, if she was the villain in this story rather than the person simply trying to set a boundary. But by the time she pulled into her parking space, by the time she climbed the stairs to her condo and locked the door behind her, she knew she hadn't been wrong. Uncomfortable, maybe. Disappointing to people who had expected something different, certainly. But not wrong. She had said no to protect something she had built, something that mattered to her. And if that made her selfish in their eyes, then maybe she was finally okay with being selfish, with prioritizing her own stability over someone else's dreams, with understanding that love shouldn't come with a price tag attached. She just didn't know yet how much that no was going to cost her. The messages started the next morning. Emily woke to 17 missed calls and a barrage of texts that ranged from pleading to hostile, from manipulation disguised as concern to outright verbal attacks. Rachel had texted at 2 a.m. "I hope you're happy, watching your sister's dreams die because you're too scared to take a chance on family." Her mother had sent a long message about disappointment and expectations and how Emily had always been the difficult child, the one who never quite fit, the one who thought she was better than everyone else. Emily deleted them all without responding. She had learned from her therapist that not every accusation deserves a defense, that sometimes the healthiest response is silence, is the refusal to engage with narratives designed to provoke guilt rather than facilitate understanding. But the messages continued. Throughout the week they came at random hours, disrupting meetings, interrupting sleep, arriving with a persistent rhythm of people who believed that if they just said the right thing, applied the right pressure, Emily would crack and give them what they wanted. On Friday evening her father called. Emily almost didn't answer, but some remaining instinct of daughterly obligation made her pick up. "Dad, we need to talk." His voice was formal, distant, like he was speaking to a subordinate at work rather than his daughter. "Your mother and I have discussed this situation extensively. We've given you time to reconsider your position." "There's nothing to reconsider. My answer hasn't changed." "Then we need to be very clear with you about consequences, Emily. Your sister is devastated. She's barely eating, barely sleeping. Do you understand what you've done to her?" Emily felt anger flare in her chest, sharp and clarifying. "I haven't done anything to her. I declined to invest in a business. That's not an attack, Dad. That's a personal financial decision. It's a rejection of family. It's a statement that you value money more than the people who raised you, who loved you, who were there for you when no one else was. That's not what it is, and you know it." Her father was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, had taken on a quality Emily had never heard before, something cold and final. "Your mother and I have decided that if you cannot support this family when we need you, then you are no longer part of this family. We will not be reaching out to you anymore. We will not be attending any events you might invite us to. We will not be available for holidays or birthdays or any other occasions. You have made your choice, Emily. Now you have to live with it." The line went dead before Emily could respond, before she could process what had just been said, before she could even begin to formulate a reaction. She stood in her kitchen holding the phone, staring at the screen as it faded to black, feeling something fundamental shift inside her, some foundational belief about the world cracking and reforming into a new shape. They had cut her off. Her parents, her sister, the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally, had decided that her love had conditions after all, and she had failed to meet them. For 3 days, Emily functioned on autopilot. She went to work, responded to emails, attended meetings where she contributed nothing of value and no one seemed to notice. She came home to her condo that had felt like freedom but now felt like isolation, ate meals she didn't taste, slept in fits and starts punctuated by dreams where her family stood on one side of a widening chasm and she stood on the other, unable to reach them, unsure if she even wanted to. On the fourth day, she called her therapist and got an emergency session. She sat in the familiar office with its familiar plants and its familiar smell of lavender, and she finally cried. Not delicate tears but ugly, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal, grief for something she hadn't known she could lose, something she had taken for granted as permanent and discovered was conditional all along. They disowned me, she said when she could speak. Over money. Over a business investment. They just cut me off like I'm nothing. Her therapist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chan who shared Emily's last name but no relation, leaned forward with the expression of someone delivering difficult truth. Emily, I need you to hear something that might be uncomfortable. This isn't about the money. This is about control, about your role in the family system, about what happens when someone stops playing the part they've been assigned. What do you mean? You've been the responsible one, the one who saves and plans and doesn't make waves. That role served them well because it meant you were stable, reliable, someone they could depend on when they needed something. But responsibility without boundaries isn't actually responsibility. It's just being available for exploitation. When you set a boundary, when you said no, you disrupted the system. And systems don't like being disrupted. Emily wiped her eyes with a tissue that had disintegrated into useless fragments. So what do? You grieve what you thought you had. And then you decide what you actually want, separate from their expectations, separate from guilt or obligation. You build a life that doesn't require their approval to feel valid. The grief part turned out to be longer and harder than Emily expected. She went through phases, anger and bargaining and depression cycling through her in no particular order. She wrote letters she never sent, imagined conversations where she finally made them understand, fantasized about scenarios where they realized their mistake and came back apologizing, begging her forgiveness. But slowly, in the spaces between the grief, something else began to emerge. Clarity maybe. Relief certainly. A recognition that the weight she had been carrying, the obligation to be available for whatever they needed, to maintain relationships that had always felt slightly transactional, to prove her worth through continuous demonstration of loyalty. All of that was gone now. They had removed it, and in doing so had accidentally given her permission to build something new. 2 months after that final phone call, Emily changed her number. She didn't tell them, didn't leave a forwarding contact, just erased that particular connection and felt lighter for it. She blocked their emails, their social media accounts, removed every digital tether that could allow them back into her life uninvited. Her co-workers noticed the change, commented that she seemed happier, more present, less distracted by some invisible weight. Emily joined them for after-work drinks, started saying yes to weekend hiking trips, allowed herself to exist in the moment rather than constantly preparing for the next family crisis that might require her intervention or her money or her emotional labor. She even started dating again, this time with less anxiety, less fear that anyone she brought into her life would have to navigate the complicated dynamics of her family relationships. There was no family to navigate anymore, no dinner invitations she would have to strategically avoid, no holidays where she would have to perform contentment while feeling fundamentally misunderstood. The freedom was disorienting at first, like standing in a room where walls had suddenly been removed, exposing space she hadn't known existed. But gradually, she learned to inhabit that space, to stretch into it, to understand that family was supposed to be the people who supported your growth, not the people who required you to stay small to make them comfortable. She found community in unexpected places. Her co-workers became friends, genuine ones who invited her to game nights and birthday parties and didn't expect anything in return except her company. She joined a book club at the local library, started volunteering at a coding workshop for high school girls, built a network of connection that was chosen rather than inherited, that felt solid in ways her biological family never had. And when people asked about her family, which they inevitably did, she learned to say simply, "We're not in touch." Without elaboration, without justification, without the shame she had initially felt at admitting that family could be something you walked away from. 5 years passed. 5 years of building a life that was entirely her own, of promotions and friendships and small joys that accumulated into contentment. 5 years of not checking her phone anxiously, not bracing for criticism, not second-guessing every financial decision through the lens of whether it would seem selfish to people who had decided she was selfish anyway. Emily turned 32 in a house full of friends, blowing out candles on a cake someone had baked because they wanted to, not because obligation demanded it. She had recently been promoted to senior software engineer, was seeing someone named Daniel who made her laugh and didn't require her to be anyone other than who she was. Had traveled to 3 countries and learned to paddleboard and adopted a cat who slept on her chest every night, purring like contentment given physical form. Life was good. Life was stable. Life was hers. She should have known that stability never lasts, that the past has a way of resurfaces when you least expect it, that walking away from family doesn't mean they've walked away from you. The first message came on a Thursday evening in October, from a number she didn't recognize. "Emily, this is Rachel. We need to talk. It's urgent." Emily stared at the message for a long time, her heart rate elevating, old anxiety pathways lighting up like neural highways that had never quite been demolished, just abandoned. She thought about deleting it, about maintaining the boundaries she had built and defended for 5 years. But curiosity, or maybe some remaining thread of connection she hadn't quite severed, made her respond. "What do you want?" The reply came immediately. "Not over text. Call me, please. It's important." Against every instinct that screamed at her to block the number and forget this had happened, Emily called. Rachel answered on the first ring. "Emily. Oh God, Emily, thank you for calling. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure. What do you want, Rachel?" Her sister's voice was different than Emily remembered, thinner, more fragile, stripped of the confidence that had once seemed unshakable. "I'm in trouble, Em. Real trouble. The business, it didn't work out the way I planned. I'm sorry to hear that. I need help. We lost everything, Emily. The investors are suing me, Mark left me, and Mom and Dad, they..." Emily closed her eyes, already knowing where this was going, already feeling the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. "Rachel, I can't. I'm not asking for money. I know you won't give me money. I need to know you're there. I need family. Please. Can we meet? Can we just talk?" And because Emily was still, despite everything, someone who wanted to believe in redemption, in change, in the possibility that people could grow and relationships could heal, she said yes. That decision, that moment of yielding to old hope, would prove to be a mistake she wouldn't fully understand until she was standing behind a police cruiser 3 months later, watching her parents destroy a stranger's living room with a baseball bat, learning finally and definitively that some people never change, they just find new ways to hurt you. Before we get to that Thursday evening in October, before the phone call that would unravel everything, let me take you through what those 5 years actually looked like. The 5 years Emily lived in peace, in freedom, in the careful construction of a life that felt genuinely hers. The first year was the hardest, not because Emily regretted her decision, but because grief is not a linear process and healing doesn't follow a schedule you can plan around. There were days when she would see something, a particular brand of tea her mother always bought, a song her father used to play on Sunday mornings, and the loss would hit her like physical pain, sudden and disorienting. She would have to pull over while driving, or leave a store before completing her shopping, or simply sit on her couch letting the feelings wash through her until they passed. Her therapist helped her understand that she wasn't grieving the family she had, but the family she had wanted, the ideal version that had never quite existed except in her hopes and her willingness to overlook pattern after pattern of conditional love. "You're mourning a fantasy," Dr. Chan told her. And that's actually harder than mourning something real, because fantasies don't have closure, they just fade. Emily joined an online support group for adults who had been estranged from their families, and discovered a whole community of people carrying similar wounds, similar guilt, similar relief. They shared stories in careful language, supporting each other through holidays that suddenly felt empty, through milestones that seemed less meaningful without parental acknowledgement, through the constant social pressure to reconcile because family is family, as if biology created obligations that superseded basic respect and kindness. But gradually, the grief became less consuming. Emily started to notice the space that had opened up in her life, Space that wasn't filled with anxiety about the next family dinner, the next request, the next crisis that would require her intervention or her resources. She could make plans without mentally calculating how to avoid questions about why she never visited home. She could spend money without a voice in her head asking if she was being selfish, if she should be saving it for whatever emergency her family might manufacture. Work became a refuge in unexpected ways. Emily had always been competent at her job, reliable and thorough, but she had never been particularly ambitious. She did what was required and no more, saving her energy for the weekend freelancing that had funded her condo. But without the constant emotional drain of family dynamics, she found she had capacity for more, interest in projects that went beyond just collecting a paycheck. She started volunteering for the complex problems, the systems that needed complete overhauls, the code that everyone else found too tangled to want to touch. Her manager noticed, started assigning her to higher profile projects, ones that interfaced directly with major clients. Emily discovered she was good at translating technical concepts for non-technical people, at finding elegant solutions to problems others had overcomplicated. Within 2 years, she was promoted to senior developer. Within 3, she was leading her own small team, mentoring junior engineers, participating in hiring decisions. The salary increases were substantial, and for the first time in her adult life, Emily had money that wasn't earmarked for survival or savings, money she could use for experiences rather than just security. She traveled, carefully at first, weekend trips to nearby cities, then longer journeys to places she had only read about. She went to Seattle and Portland and Vancouver, wandered through bookstores and coffee shops and parks, stayed in hostels where she met other solo travelers and learned that being alone didn't have to mean being lonely. She went to Iceland and watched the northern lights paint the sky in colors that seemed impossible, stood on black sand beaches and felt small in the best possible way, understood that the world was larger and stranger and more beautiful than the narrow bounds of family obligation had ever let her see. She developed hobbies that had nothing to do with productivity or improvement, things she did simply because they brought her joy. She took a pottery class and was terrible at it, her bowls always lopsided, her vases collapsing into abstract sculptures. But she loved it anyway, loved the feeling of clay under her hands, the meditative quality of working with something physical after spending all day with code and screens. She learned to cook properly, not just the 7 rotation meals she had survived on during her saving years, but actual cuisine, following recipes from cookbooks she borrowed from the library and then eventually bought because she wanted to mark them up with notes and modifications. She hosted dinner parties in her small condo, filling it with laughter and conversation and the smell of food made with care rather than efficiency. And then there was Daniel. They met in the most modern of ways, through an app that Emily had downloaded and deleted approximately 7 times before finally going on an actual date. Daniel was a civil engineer, quiet and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that took Emily a while to recognize but grew to love. Their first date was coffee that turned into dinner that turned into a 4-hour conversation that covered everything from childhood dreams to opinions on whether cereal was soup. What made Daniel different from the few other people Emily had dated was his complete lack of agenda. He didn't try to fix her, didn't push for more than she was ready to give, didn't treat her estrangement from her family as a problem that needed solving. When she told him about the dinner, the disownment, the 5 years of silence, he simply said, "That must have been really hard. I'm glad you chose yourself." Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, with the patience of 2 people who had learned that rushing rarely led anywhere good. They went on hikes where they talked about philosophy and engineering principles and whether reality television could be considered anthropological study. They cooked together in his kitchen and hers, developing a comfortable rhythm of collaboration. They introduced each other to their respective friend groups and watched those circles gradually merge and overlap. Daniel never pressed Emily about her family. He invited her to meet his parents, warm people who welcomed her without interrogation, who treated her like someone valued rather than someone who needed to prove her worth. When holidays came around, he asked what she wanted to do, offered options without expectation, made it clear that he was happy to spend them however she felt comfortable, whether that meant joining his family or creating their own traditions or simply treating the day like any other. By the end of the 4th year, Emily and Daniel had fallen into a kind of domestic partnership that felt both exciting and stable, the kind of relationship where you could be fully yourself without performance or pretense. They kept their separate places but spent most nights together, had keys to each other's apartments, had established routines and inside jokes and the easy shorthand of people who genuinely knew each other. Emily's life had become something she had never quite imagined during those 4 years of weekend freelancing and instant ramen and sleeping on an air mattress in an empty condo. She had friends who chose her company, work that challenged and fulfilled her, hobbies that brought her joy, a partner who saw her fully and loved what he saw. She had built something solid and good, and she had done it without the family that had once claimed to be essential to her happiness, her success, her worth as a human being. The absence of them had become just that, an absence, not a wound that constantly reopened but a space that had scarred over and integrated into the landscape of her life. She rarely thought about her parents anymore, occasionally wondered about Rachel in that distant way you might wonder about an old classmate whose life had diverged from yours so completely that reconnection would be more awkward than meaningful. So when her phone buzzed with that message on a Thursday evening in October, when Rachel's name appeared on a screen after 5 years of silence, Emily's first emotion wasn't curiosity or concern. It was annoyance, the sense that something from an old life she had carefully packed away was trying to force its way back into her present, something she had specifically decided she didn't want or need. But along with the annoyance came something else, something Emily had thought she had outgrown but apparently had just suppressed. Hope. The irrational, persistent hope that maybe things had changed, that maybe her family had spent these 5 years reflecting and growing and becoming people capable of relationship without exploitation, without condition, without the constant transactional nature that had characterized every interaction she could remember. That hope, as it turned out, was the most dangerous thing Emily could have felt. Because hope makes you vulnerable, makes you willing to give second chances to people who haven't earned them, makes you believe in narratives of redemption that exist more in movies than in real life. When Emily called Rachel back and heard her sister's voice, thin and desperate and asking for connection rather than money, something in Emily softened despite her better judgment. She agreed to meet for coffee, told herself she was just being open-minded, that hearing Rachel out didn't mean letting her back in, that she could maintain boundaries while still being compassionate. The coffee meeting was awkward but not hostile. Rachel looked older, worn down in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with failure and stress and the consequences of decisions made with more confidence than wisdom. She told Emily about the business, how it had initially seemed promising, how she had expanded too fast and taken on too much debt, how the investors had turned predatory when things started going south, how Mark had left her when her finances collapsed, taking half of what little remained. Emily listened, maintaining the emotional distance she had worked so hard to cultivate, reminding herself that Rachel's problems were not her responsibility. But when Rachel started crying, not the performative tears Emily remembered from family dinners but genuine grief over a life that had imploded, Emily found herself reaching across the table, holding her sister's hand, offering the comfort of physical connection if not financial salvation. They started meeting occasionally after that, once every few weeks, always in public places, always with Emily maintaining clear boundaries about what she could and couldn't offer. Rachel seemed to accept those boundaries, seemed genuinely interested in rebuilding a relationship without the toxicity that had defined their past interactions. She asked about Emily's life, her work, her relationship with Daniel, and seemed happy for her sister's happiness in a way that felt authentic rather than envious. Emily introduced Rachel to Daniel after a few months, nervous about how that would go, worried that her sister would revert to old patterns of criticism and comparison. But Rachel was charming and appropriate, asked Daniel about his work with genuine interest, told funny stories about Emily as a child that were affectionate rather than embarrassing. Daniel liked her, said afterwards that he could see the family resemblance, that he understood why Emily had been willing to try reconciliation. What Emily didn't see, what she couldn't have seen because she was too close and too hopeful, was that Rachel was building something, accumulating information, studying the landscape of Emily's new life with the careful attention of someone planning a campaign rather than rebuilding a relationship. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in January, 7 months after that first reconciliation coffee, 5 months after Rachel had met Daniel, 3 months after Emily had let herself believe that maybe family could be reclaimed, redeemed, rebuilt into something healthier than what had existed before. Emily was at work, in the middle of a code review, when her phone lit up with Rachel's name. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the timing, a weekday morning when Rachel knew Emily would be working, suggested urgency that might be legitimate. "Rach, what's wrong?" Her sister's voice was strange, too controlled, like someone reading from a script while trying to inject emotion into it. I need you to listen to me carefully and not hang up. Can you promise me that?" Emily's stomach dropped, that old familiar anxiety flooding back instantly. "What happened?" "I'm at Mom and Dad's house. They're here with me. We've been talking about you, about everything that happened 5 years ago, and we want to make things right. We want our family back." Emily stood up from her desk, walking quickly toward the stairwell where she could have this conversation in private. "Rachel, I don't understand. You've been saying things were better with us just connecting one-on-one. Why would you involve them without talking to me first?" "Because they're sorry, Emily. They're really, genuinely sorry for how they treated you. And they know they can't just call you out of the blue, that you'd never take their call. So they asked me to reach out, to see if you'd be willing to meet with all of us, to talk about moving forward." Emily leaned against the stairwell wall, her mind racing through calculations and possibilities, trying to determine if this was genuine or manipulation, if 5 years had actually changed people, or if this was just a new strategy for getting what they wanted. "What do they want, Rachel? Be honest with me." There was a pause, too long, too weighted. "They want to apologize. They want to rebuild. But Emily, there's also something else. Something I need to tell you about, because if you find out from someone else you'll never forgive any of us." "Tell me now." "The business situation, it's worse than I explained before. The lawsuit, it went through. They won a judgment against me for $180,000. I don't have it, Emily. I don't have anything close to it. They can garnish my wages, but that will take years, and in the meantime, they've put a lien on Mom and Dad's house because I'm living here and they're trying to claim I'm hiding assets." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the trap spring shut around her even as Rachel was still explaining it. "And now you need money. Now you all need money. And you think coming at me as a united family will make me more likely to help. It's not like that." Rachel's voice rose, defensive. "Yes, we need help, but that's not why we want to reconnect. These are separate things, Em. Can't they be separate things?" "No, Rachel. I can't. Because if they were separate, you would have told me about the lawsuit when we first reconnected. You would have been honest about your situation. Instead, you hid it, you built up trust, you got me comfortable letting you back into my life. And now you're springing this on me when I'm invested enough to feel guilty about saying no. That's not fair. Isn't it? Tell me, Rachel, honestly, if I hadn't bought that condo, if I didn't have assets and savings and financial stability, would you still want to reconcile? Would Mom and Dad still want their daughter back? Or would I still be disowned because I'm not useful to you?" The silence on the other end told Emily everything she needed to know. She ended the call without saying goodbye, without giving Rachel a chance to pivot to the next phase of whatever argument she had prepared, without entertaining the possibility that any of this was genuine. She sat in the stairwell for 20 minutes, missing the code review, missing a stand-up meeting, sitting with the grief and anger and bitter validation of every instinct that had told her to keep her distance, to not hope, to understand that people don't fundamentally change just because you want them to. When she finally went back to her desk, there were 12 missed calls and 23 text messages. Her parents had apparently obtained her new number from Rachel, and they were no longer pretending this was about reconciliation. The messages were blunt, accusatory, demanding. "Your sister is in serious trouble because you refused to help her 5 years ago. This is your fault. The least you can do is fix it now." Emily blocked their numbers, blocked Rachel's number, turned off her phone entirely. She told her manager she wasn't feeling well and went home, needing the safety and quiet of her own space, needing to process what had just happened and what it meant for the fragile hope she had allowed herself to entertain. Daniel came over that evening, let himself in with the key she had given him, found her sitting on the couch staring at nothing, wrapped in a blanket despite the heating being on. He didn't ask questions immediately, just sat next to her, put his arm around her shoulders, and waited until she was ready to talk. When she finally explained everything, the reconciliation, the phone call, the manipulation, the realization that nothing had changed except the tactics, Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry. I know you wanted them to be different than they are. That's a hard thing to accept." "I feel so stupid," Emily said, her voice small. "I should have known better. I should have seen this coming." "You're not stupid for hoping people could grow. That's not naivety, Emily. That's compassion. They're the ones who weaponized it." "What do I do now?" Daniel pulled her closer. "You do what you did before. You protect yourself. You maintain boundaries. You let them deal with the consequences of their own choices without making those consequences your responsibility." "They're going to lose their house," Emily said, and despite everything, despite the manipulation and the lies and the conditional love, she felt guilty about it, felt like maybe she was the monster they accused her of being. "That's not because of you. That's because Rachel made bad business decisions and they enabled her. You're not obligated to fix other people's mistakes just because you have the resources to do so, especially when those people have treated you terribly." Emily knew he was right, intellectually understood that setting boundaries wasn't the same as being heartless. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things, and the guilt sat heavy in her chest, persistent and corrosive. The messages continued for 3 days, escalating in their accusations and their demands. They called her selfish, cold, vindictive. They claimed she was punishing Rachel for a mistake made years ago, that she was using her financial security as a weapon, that she had always thought she was better than them and now she was proving it. On the 4th day the messages stopped. Emily told herself this was good, that maybe they had finally accepted that she wasn't going to help, that they would find another solution that didn't involve her. She relaxed slightly, let herself believe that the crisis had passed. She should have known better. Silence from people like her family wasn't acceptance. It was planning. 2 weeks after the last message, Emily came home from work to find that someone had been in her building, asking questions about her apartment number, claiming to be family who needed to see her urgently. The building manager had followed protocol and refused to give out information or let them up, but the incident made Emily nervous, made her realize that her address might no longer be private, that the physical boundary of distance might not be enough. She told Daniel about it that evening, and he suggested something she hadn't considered. "You've been wanting to sell the condo anyway, right? To get something bigger, maybe a house. What if we expedited that? What if we found somewhere together, somewhere they don't know about?" The idea was appealing for multiple reasons. Emily had been thinking about moving. The condo that had once felt like perfect freedom now felt slightly small, slightly limiting. And the idea of living with Daniel, of officially merging their lives rather than just spending nights in each other's spaces, felt right, felt like the next natural step in a relationship that had been solid and good and everything her family relationships had never been. "You're sure?" Emily asked. "I come with a lot of complicated baggage." Daniel smiled. "Everyone has baggage. Yours just happens to involve people who might show up demanding money. I can handle that." They started looking at houses the next week, focusing on neighborhoods far enough from Emily's current location that her family would have no reason to look there, places where they could have space and privacy and a fresh start. Within a month, they found a small house with a yard and a garage and enough bedrooms that they could each have an office, a space that felt like possibility rather than just shelter. Emily put her condo on the market immediately, priced it slightly below market value to ensure a quick sale. She didn't want to give her family time to find out and try to claim some stake in it, didn't want to risk them causing problems that might complicate the transaction. The condo sold in 4 days, multiple offers, cash buyer who wanted to close quickly. Perfect. The closing date was set for 3 weeks out. Emily started packing immediately, systematically going through every room, every closet, every drawer, organizing her life into boxes labeled with careful specificity. It felt good, this physical manifestation of moving forward, of literally leaving behind the space where her family had last known how to find her. She didn't tell Rachel or her parents about the move. She saw no reason to, no obligation to keep people informed about her life when they had made it clear that her life only mattered to them insofar as it could be exploited. She changed her mailing address, updated her accounts, ensured that no trace of her future location would be connected to her old one. The week before closing, Emily and Daniel moved most of her belongings into storage, taking only essentials to his apartment where she was staying until the house purchase finalized. Her condo stood nearly empty, echoing and strange, looking like it had when she had first bought it, when it had represented possibility and freedom and the beginning of something new. She had no way of knowing that her family had discovered the condo was for sale, that they had been watching, waiting, planning. She had no way of knowing that her father had convinced himself that if he couldn't convince Emily with words, he would convince her with action, with consequences, with a demonstration of just how serious their situation was. She had no way of knowing that on a Tuesday night in late February, her parents would arrive at the address they still believed was hers, armed with a baseball bat and a sense of righteous fury, determined to destroy what she had built if she wouldn't use it to save them. She had no way of knowing that the new owners, a young couple with a baby, had moved in 2 days early, excited about their first home, sleeping soundly in the bedroom that used to be Emily's. She had no way of knowing any of this until she got the call from the police, asking if she knew why her parents had been arrested for breaking into a home that used to be hers and destroying thousands of dollars worth of property that belonged to complete strangers. The detective's voice on the phone was professional, neutral, giving nothing away about what she thought of the situation she was calling about. Ms. Chen. This is Detective Williams with the California Police Department. I'm calling regarding an incident that occurred tonight at 842 Maple Street, Unit 2B. Records indicate that until recently, you were the owner of that property. Emily's hand tightened on her phone, her mind immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. Fire, flood, something structurally wrong that she hadn't disclosed. Yes, I sold it 2 weeks ago. Is everything okay? Did something happen with the property? The property is fine structurally, Ms. Chen. But there was an incident of vandalism and attempted burglary tonight. 2 individuals were arrested at the scene. They were carrying identification indicating they are your parents, Richard and Susan Chen. Emily sat down abruptly on Daniel's couch, the room spinning slightly. What? They forced entry into the unit and caused significant property damage before we arrived. They were yelling that they were there to see their daughter, that you owed them, that they were going to take what they deserved. The new owners are understandably very upset. They have a 3-month-old baby, Ms. Chen. They're traumatized. Oh my God. Emily's voice came out small, shocked. I had no idea. I haven't spoken to them in weeks. I didn't even tell them I sold the condo. They seemed very surprised to find different people living there. Would you be willing to come to the station to provide a statement? It would help us understand the context of this situation, and frankly, the new owners are considering pressing charges. Your testimony about your relationship with your parents might be relevant. Emily agreed immediately, still processing what she had heard, trying to reconcile the parents who had raised her, who had taught her to tie her shoes and helped her with homework and attended her school plays, with people who would break into a home with a baby inside because they felt entitled to something that had never been theirs. Daniel drove her to the police station, holding her hand the entire way, not saying much because what was there to say? They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, had done something so reckless and violent that it revealed depths of dysfunction Emily had never fully acknowledged, patterns she had minimized and explained away and excused until they exploded into something that couldn't be minimized anymore. At the station, Detective Williams led Emily into a small interview room and sat across from her with a notepad and a recording device. I need to understand the history here, Ms. Chen. Help me put this in context. Emily told the story from the beginning. The family dinner 5 years ago, the demand for money, the disownment, the reconciliation attempt that had really been another manipulation, the escalating messages and the eventual silence. Detective Williams took notes without interruption, her expression unchanging, professional. When Emily finished, the detective set down her pen and looked at her directly. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you this clearly. Do you feel safe? Do you believe your parents pose a threat to you or your property? The question made Emily's chest tighten. To answer yes felt like a betrayal of something fundamental, an acknowledgement that her own parents, the people who were supposed to protect her from the world, were now the danger she needed protection from. But to answer no would be a lie, and she had spent too many years lying to herself about what her family was capable of. "I don't know," Emily said finally. "I never thought they would do something like this. But clearly, I don't know them as well as I thought I did." "For what it's worth," Detective Williams said, her voice softening slightly, "you're not responsible for their choices. And from what I've heard tonight, you've been more than patient with them. Sometimes people don't want to be saved, Ms. Chen. They just want someone to blame." Emily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The detective explained the next steps, that her parents were being held pending arraignment, that the district attorney would decide whether to press charges beyond what the new homeowners were pursuing, that Emily might be called as a witness if this went to trial. On the drive back to Daniel's apartment, Emily's phone started ringing. Rachel calling from yet another new number Emily would have to block. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message on speaker so Daniel could hear it too. "Emily, what the hell did you do? Mom and Dad are in jail. They were just trying to talk to you, just trying to make you see reason. And now they're facing criminal charges because you couldn't just help your family when we needed it. This is your fault, Emily. All of this is your fault. If you had just been a decent human being 5 years ago, none of this would have happened. Hope you're happy. I hope your precious condo and your perfect life are worth destroying your family over." The message cut off abruptly, and Emily deleted it without listening to it again. She felt numb, disconnected from the situation, like she was watching it happen to someone else rather than living through it herself. "You know that's not true, right?" Daniel said quietly. "None of this is your fault." "I know," Emily said, but she wasn't sure if she believed it, wasn't sure if she would ever fully believe it. Intellectually, she understood that she wasn't responsible for other people's choices, that setting boundaries wasn't the same as causing harm. But emotionally, the guilt sat heavy and persistent, whispering that maybe if she had been more generous, more forgiving, more willing to sacrifice her own needs, her family wouldn't have been pushed to desperation, wouldn't have done something so destructive. The next morning, Emily woke to discover that the story had made the local news. Not the major stations, but the community blog and local Facebook groups, sensationalized with headlines about family drama and home invasion and the shocking escalation of a dispute over money. Her name wasn't mentioned, but enough details were included that anyone who knew the situation could identify everyone involved. Her phone flooded with messages, some supportive, many judgmental, people who thought they understood the situation based on a 3-paragraph article and felt entitled to share their opinions about what Emily should have done differently. She turned off notifications, put her phone on Do Not Disturb, and tried to focus on work, on the normal rhythms of life that felt increasingly distant from her current reality. The arraignment happened 3 days later. Emily didn't attend, couldn't bring herself to sit in a courtroom and watch her parents in handcuffs, to make eye contact with people who had once been her whole world and were now strangers whose choices she couldn't begin to understand. The detective called afterwards to let her know they had been released on bail, that they had pleaded not guilty, that a trial date would be set. "They're going to try to contact you," Detective Williams warned. "They're not supposed to, it's a condition of their bail, but people in their situation often violate those conditions. If they reach out, don't engage. Document everything and contact us immediately." Emily thanked her and hung up, adding yet another layer of vigilance to her life, another thing to monitor and worry about. She changed her phone number again, this time telling only Daniel and her closest friends, protecting her new information like classified data. The next few weeks passed in uneasy quiet. Emily and Daniel closed on their house, a process that should have been exciting but felt muted by everything else happening. They moved in together, unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, tried to create a home in the shadow of crisis. The house was beautiful, exactly what they had wanted, but Emily couldn't fully enjoy it, couldn't shake the feeling that her family would somehow find her there, that nowhere was truly safe. She started having nightmares, vivid dreams where her parents broke into the new house, where Rachel appeared in her office at work demanding money, where she was trapped at that dinner table 5 years ago but couldn't stand up to leave, couldn't find her voice to say no. She woke up gasping, disoriented, needing several minutes to remember where she was, to reassure herself that she was safe, that Daniel was next to her, that her family didn't know where she lived. Her therapist suggested PTSD might be a factor, that the combination of years of boundary violations, emotional manipulation, and now actual violence had created trauma responses that would take time and work to process. Emily added another weekly appointment to her schedule, started doing trauma-focused therapy, learned grounding techniques and breathing exercises and ways to interrupt the anxiety spirals before they completely consumed her. 6 weeks after the arrest, the new owners of Emily's old condo reached out through their lawyer. They wanted to meet with Emily to understand the situation, to decide how to proceed with the charges. Emily agreed reluctantly, bringing Daniel and meeting them in a neutral office where they could talk without the charged atmosphere of the damaged home. The couple, Amanda and James, were younger than Emily, maybe 25, first-time buyers who had been so excited about their condo until it became the site of violence and violation. Amanda held their baby, a tiny girl named Sophie who slept through the entire meeting, oblivious to the adult complications swirling around her. "We just want to understand," Amanda said, her voice gentle but firm. "Why did they think it was okay to do what they did? Why would parents do that to their own child's home?" Emily explained again the whole story, feeling like she was confessing sins she hadn't committed, bearing witness to family dysfunction she had spent years trying to escape. Amanda and James listened without interruption, their expressions shifting from confusion to understanding to something that looked like pity. "I'm so sorry," Emily said when she finished. "I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. I never wanted anyone else to be hurt by my family's problems." Amanda exchanged a glance with James, some silent communication passing between them. "We believe you," she said finally. "And we're going to press charges. Not because we're vindictive but because what they did was wrong, and they need to face consequences. But we wanted you to know that we don't hold you responsible. This isn't your fault." Emily felt tears prick her eyes, the kindness of these strangers who had been victimized by her family somehow more overwhelming than the victimization itself. "Thank you," she managed. "I'm so sorry about everything." They left the meeting with a strange sense of closure, Emily knowing that at least Amanda and James understood the context, that they didn't see her as the villain in this story. It didn't erase the guilt entirely, but it helped, provided a small counterweight to the accusations that still echoed in her mind. The trial was set for 3 months out. Emily hired a lawyer, not because she was being charged with anything, but because she needed someone to help her navigate the process, to protect her interests if her family tried to drag her into their legal problems. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia who specialized in family law and understood the dynamics of estrangement, helped Emily prepare a statement for the court, documenting the history of manipulation and boundary violations that had led to this moment. "Your family is going to try to paint you as the aggressor," Patricia warned. "They're going to claim they were driven to desperation by your refusal to help. You need to be prepared for them to attack your character, to try to make you look selfish and cold in front of the judge." "Let them," Emily said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'm done defending myself to people who have decided I'm the villain regardless of what I do. The facts speak for themselves. I didn't break into anyone's home. I didn't destroy anyone's property. I didn't traumatize innocent people trying to start their lives. They did." Patricia smiled. "Good. That's exactly the energy you need to maintain. Remember, you don't have to justify your boundaries to anyone, least of all to people who have never respected them." As the trial date approached, Emily found herself oddly calm, like she had moved through anxiety into something else, some acceptance that whatever happened next was out of her control. She had told the truth, documented everything, prepared as well as she could. The rest was up to the legal system and the choices her family would make in that courtroom. She didn't know yet that the trial would never happen, that her parents would accept a plea deal, that the consequences they faced would ripple out in ways none of them had anticipated. She didn't know that this chapter was almost over, that the worst of it was nearly past, that she was closer to real freedom than she had ever been. All she knew was that she was tired, bone-deep tired of carrying the weight of other people's choices, of feeling responsible for family members who had never taken responsibility for themselves. And in that tiredness, in that exhaustion with the entire situation, she found something unexpected: clarity. Pure, simple clarity about what she needed to do next. What Emily didn't know until much later, what she only pieced together from police reports and court documents and one devastating conversation with Detective Williams, was exactly what had happened that night her parents destroyed the condo. The details mattered, not because they changed anything fundamental about the situation, but because they revealed just how far gone her family had become, how completely they had abandoned reality in favor of a narrative where they were victims and Emily was the villain who needed to be punished. It started 3 days before the incident, when Rachel finally managed to track down Emily's condo address through public property records. She had been monitoring the site obsessively, watching for any change in Emily's status, any clue about what Emily owned and where she lived. When the sale record appeared, showing the property had transferred to new owners 2 weeks earlier, Rachel didn't tell their parents immediately. She let the information sit, ferment, calculating how to use it most effectively. The family's financial situation had deteriorated beyond recovery. The judgment against Rachel had been final, the garnishment orders had been issued, and the collection agency had indeed placed a lien on their parents' house. Richard and Susan faced losing the home they had owned for 30 years, the house where they had raised their daughters, where they had built their life. The unfairness of it consumed them, twisted their thinking into knots that couldn't be untangled by logic or reason. In their minds, the narrative had become simple, absolute. Emily had money. Emily had refused to share that money with family. Emily's refusal had caused all of this. Therefore, Emily was responsible, and Emily needed to face consequences. Rachel fed that narrative carefully, deliberately, knowing exactly what she was doing. She told them about the condo sale, but she lied about the timing. She said Emily had sold it just days ago, that Emily must have gotten spooked by their attempts to contact her, that Emily was clearly hiding assets and trying to make sure the family couldn't claim any of them. "She's probably already bought something else," Rachel said, her voice carefully modulated to sound concerned rather than manipulative. "Something we don't know about, somewhere we'll never find. She's covering her tracks, making sure we can't even beg her for help because we won't know how to reach her." The truth was more complicated, of course. Rachel was angry that Emily had escaped, furious that her younger sister had built a stable life while Rachel's empire had crumbled. But more than that, Rachel had realized that if she could push their parents to do something dramatic, something that would force Emily to engage, maybe there was still a chance of getting money out of the situation. At the very least, if Emily was dealing with a family crisis, she might be more vulnerable to negotiation, more likely to pay something just to make the problem go away. It was calculated cruelty disguised as desperation, and it worked exactly as Rachel intended. Richard became obsessed with the idea that Emily had sold the condo specifically to spite them, that she was out there somewhere living comfortably while they lost everything. Susan fed his anger with her own, the two of them spiraling into a shared delusion where confronting Emily, making her see what she had done, became the only solution that made sense. Rachel gave them the address. She knew it had sold. She knew new people lived there. But she told her parents it was still Emily's, that Emily was probably inside right now, counting her money, celebrating her escape from family obligations. "Maybe if you show up in person," Rachel suggested, her voice innocent. "If you make it clear how serious this is, she'll finally understand. She'll see what she's done to this family. Maybe confronting her face to face will break through that wall she's built." She didn't suggest violence explicitly. She was too smart for that, too aware that she needed plausible deniability if this went wrong. But she planted the seeds, watered them with righteous fury, and watched as her parents cultivated those seeds into action. On Tuesday evening, Richard and Susan drove to the address Rachel had given them. They had been drinking, not enough to be obviously intoxicated, but enough to lower inhibitions, to quiet the part of their brains that might have questioned what they were about to do. Richard had a baseball bat in the trunk, something he had purchased that afternoon with deliberate intent. If words didn't work, if Emily refused to listen, he would make her understand through other means. They arrived at 9:30 at night, when the building was quiet, when most residents were inside their units winding down for the evening. Richard parked on the street, and they sat in the car for several minutes, working themselves up, rehearsing what they would say, imagining Emily's face when she opened the door and found them there. When they finally approached the building, they found the main door propped open, a violation of building policy that some resident had committed for convenience, making entry trivially easy. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, found Unit 2B, and knocked. Pounded really hard enough that other residents later reported hearing it, assuming it was someone locked out rather than something more sinister. Inside the unit, Amanda and James were already in bed, exhausted from months of newborn sleep deprivation. Sophie was in her bassinet next to their bed, finally sleeping after hours of fussiness. The pounding on the door woke all three of them, Sophie immediately beginning to cry, Amanda's heart rate spiking with the particular terror of a new mother whose child has been disturbed. James went to the door, looked through the peephole, saw two older people he didn't recognize. "Can I help you?" he called through the door, not opening it. "Emily, we know you're in there. Open this door right now." Richard's voice was loud, aggressive, the voice of someone who had decided that force was justified by circumstance. "There's no Emily here," James called back, confusion and concern warring in his voice. "You have the wrong apartment. Don't lie to us. This is her address. We know she's hiding in there. Open this door or we're coming in." James pulled out his phone, already dialing 911, trying to explain the situation to Amanda in whispers while keeping his voice calm for the people outside. "There's someone at our door claiming to know the previous owner. They're threatening to break in. We have a baby here. Please send someone quickly." But Richard didn't wait. He had spent days building up to this moment, convincing himself that Emily was the source of all his problems, that making her face consequences was not only justified but necessary. He swung the baseball bat at the door handle, the impact loud and shocking in the quiet hallway. The door splintered but held. James backed away, putting himself between the door and his family, telling Amanda to get into the bathroom with Sophie, to lock the door, to stay quiet. The second swing broke the lock mechanism. The third pushed the door open, the frame cracked and useless. Richard and Susan burst into the apartment, and for a moment everyone froze. James, standing in the middle of the living room in his pajamas, phone in hand. Amanda visible through the bedroom door, holding Sophie who was screaming now, terrified by the noise and chaos. And Richard and Susan, suddenly confronted with the reality that these were not Emily, that something had gone very wrong with their plan. "Who are you?" Susan demanded, as if they were the ones who had broken in, as if James and Amanda owed them an explanation. "We live here. You need to leave right now. The police are on their way." But Richard, too far gone to back down, too committed to the narrative he had built, didn't leave. Instead, he swung the bat at the television, shattering the screen in an explosion of glass and sparks. "Where is she? Where is Emily? I don't know who that is. Please, we have a baby, you need to leave." The destruction that followed was methodical, almost ritualistic. Richard moved through the living room, smashing everything breakable, venting fury that had nothing to do with these strangers and everything to do with his inability to control his daughter. His inability to fix his life. His inability to accept that the problems he faced were consequences of choices he and his wife had made over decades. The coffee table, the bookshelf, the windows, the lamp. All of it destroyed while Susan stood in the doorway yelling at James about Emily's selfishness, about family obligations, about how children owed their parents gratitude and support and Emily had provided neither. James recorded as much as he could on his phone, documenting the destruction, the threats, the complete disregard for the fact that they were terrorizing innocent people. When he heard sirens approaching, he felt relief so profound it made his legs weak. Richard heard them too, and reality finally penetrated his rage. He looked around at the destruction he had caused, at the young couple cowering in the bedroom, at the broken door and shattered possessions, and something like comprehension flickered across his face. "This isn't her place," he said stupidly, stating the obvious far too late for it to matter. "No," James said, his voice shaking with adrenaline and anger. "It's ours. And you just destroyed it while terrorizing my family." The police arrived within seconds, multiple officers with weapons drawn, treating this like the violent home invasion it was. Richard and Susan were ordered to the ground, handcuffed, read their rights while still trying to explain that they had made a mistake, that they thought this was their daughter's apartment, that this was all a misunderstanding. Detective Williams was called to the scene because of the unusual nature of the case, the claim that this had been intended for someone else. She interviewed James and Amanda, documented the damage, reviewed James's phone video, and pieced together what had happened. Then she pulled up property records, found Emily's name as the previous owner, and made the call that would bring Emily into the nightmare her parents had created. In the patrol car on the way to the station, Richard and Susan didn't speak. They sat in separate seats, hands cuffed behind them, watching the familiar streets of their city pass by through windows they couldn't open, beginning to understand perhaps for the first time that actions have consequences, that there are lines you can't uncross once you've crossed them. Rachel found out about the arrest through a panicked call from a neighbor who had seen the police cars, who had heard the commotion. She didn't call Emily to explain or apologize. She called to yell, to blame, to make it clear that this was somehow Emily's fault for selling the condo without telling anyone, for being so secretive about her life that their parents had been forced to this desperation. That was the story Rachel told herself, the narrative that let her sleep at night, that absolved her of responsibility for pointing her parents at an address she knew was wrong, for weaponizing their desperation in service of her own agenda. She would maintain that story through the trial, through the aftermath, through the eventual dissolution of what remained of the family. Emily learned all of this gradually, piecing it together from official documents and one brutal conversation with Detective Williams, who felt Emily deserved to know the truth, deserved to understand that this hadn't been spontaneous rage but calculated manipulation by her sister. The knowledge didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse, understanding that Rachel had been willing to put innocent people in danger, had been willing to traumatize a family with an infant, all in service of punishing Emily for setting boundaries. The legal consequences came swiftly. Richard and Susan took a plea deal, pleading guilty to burglary, vandalism, and assault charges. They were sentenced to 18 months in prison, suspended after 6 months with 3 years probation, community service, anger management classes, and restitution to Amanda and James for the property damage and therapy costs. The restitution was substantial, more than they could pay, while also dealing with the existing judgment against Rachel. Their house went into foreclosure, sold for less than they owed, leaving them with nothing. They moved into Rachel's apartment, 3 people crowded into a space meant for one, the physical closeness only highlighting the emotional distance that had grown between them as each blamed the others for how thoroughly their lives had fallen apart. Rachel never accepted responsibility, never acknowledged her role in escalating the situation. She continued to contact Emily sporadically, always blocked but always finding new numbers, new email addresses, new ways to push through boundaries. Her messages alternated between pleading and hostile, between promises that she had changed and accusations that Emily had destroyed their family through selfishness. Emily stopped reading them eventually, set up filters that automatically deleted anything from accounts she didn't recognize, built digital walls that were more effective than any physical distance could be. She learned to live with the knowledge that her family was out there somewhere, damaged and angry, and still convinced that they were the victims of Emily's choices rather than the authors of their own destruction. 1 year after the incident, Emily stood in the backyard of the house she shared with Daniel, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for the complicated reality of her life. It was a Saturday evening in March, the anniversary of that family dinner that had started everything, though Emily no longer thought of it that way. It wasn't the beginning anymore. It was just one moment in a much longer story, a story that had finally, mercifully, moved into a new chapter. Daniel came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that for a while, comfortable in silence, watching the light change and listening to the neighborhood sounds of children playing and dogs barking and life happening all around them. "You've been quiet today," Daniel said finally. "Thinking about them." "A little," Emily admitted. "But not in the way I used to. I'm not wondering if I made the right choice anymore. I'm not feeling guilty or second-guessing or wishing things could be different. I'm just noticing the date and acknowledging what it meant and feeling grateful that I'm here instead of there. Good, Daniel said, and she heard the smile in his voice. That's growth. It was growth, hard-won and slow developing, the kind that comes from consistent therapy and supportive relationships and the simple passage of time allowing wounds to heal. Emily had done the work, had sat with her therapist week after week processing trauma and unpacking family dynamics and learning to recognize patterns of manipulation that had seemed normal because they had always been present. She had learned that her family's treatment of her wasn't love twisted by circumstance, but control masquerading as connection. She had learned that real love doesn't come with conditions, doesn't require you to sacrifice your well-being to prove your loyalty, doesn't punish you for having boundaries. She had learned that family is supposed to be the people who see you fully and still choose you, not the people who only see you as a resource to be extracted. The past year had brought changes beyond just the personal healing. Emily had gotten another promotion at work, was now managing a team of 12 developers, building systems that challenged her in ways that felt exciting rather than overwhelming. She had taken up running, something she had always dismissed as tedious but had discovered was actually meditative, a way to process thoughts while moving through space. She and Daniel had gotten married in a small ceremony at a botanical garden, surrounded by friends and his family, people who showed up because they genuinely cared rather than because obligation demanded it. There had been a moment during the ceremony when Emily had felt the absence of her parents, her sister, the family that should have been there but wasn't. But that sadness had been brief, overshadowed by the presence of the people who actually were there, who had chosen to celebrate with them, who made their joy feel complete rather than incomplete. They had started talking about having children, a conversation that Emily had always assumed would be fraught with anxiety about repeating patterns, about becoming like her parents, about passing on trauma to another generation. But with Daniel, with therapy, with the distance and clarity she had gained, those fears felt manageable. She understood now that awareness was the key, that recognizing where you came from was the first step in choosing where you were going. Amanda and James had become unlikely friends after the trial, bonding over the shared trauma of that night and the shared experience of being collateral damage in someone else's family drama. They brought Sophie over sometimes for playdates with Emily's cat, a ridiculous pairing that somehow worked, the baby shrieking with delight while the cat tolerated tiny hands with surprising patience. "I don't blame you, you know," Amanda had said once, during one of those visits, "for what happened to us. I know you probably worry about that, feel responsible somehow. But you're not. Your family made choices, Emily. You just refuse to be defined by those choices. There's a difference." That difference, Emily had learned, was everything. She couldn't control what her family did, how they reacted to her boundaries, what narratives they built to explain away their own behavior. She could only control her response, her choices, her commitment to building a life that didn't require her to betray herself to maintain connection. The legal situation had finally resolved completely 6 months ago. Richard and Susan had completed their prison time, had started their probation, had paid what they could of the restitution with the proceeds from their house sale. The remaining balance would follow them for years, maybe decades, a permanent reminder of what their rage had cost them. Rachel was still working, still struggling with the debt that had started everything, still living with their parents in cramped bitterness. Emily knew this from occasional Google searches she did late at night when she couldn't sleep, checking to make sure they weren't in trouble, weren't homeless, weren't in any situation that might somehow become her problem. She didn't do this out of love or obligation, but out of self-preservation, the simple recognition that staying informed was better than being blindsided. She had heard through distant relatives that Rachel had started a blog about family estrangement, positioning herself as the victim of a sister who had abandoned her family over money. Emily had read it once, seen the distorted narrative where Rachel was the loving sister, and Emily was the cold career woman who valued money over connection. She had felt anger initially, the desire to correct the record, to share the actual story with its full context and nuance. But Dr. Chan had talked her through it, helped her understand that defending yourself to people who have already decided you're the villain is a waste of energy, that the people who know you don't need the defense and the people who believe Rachel's version wouldn't believe Emily's truth even if she shouted it from rooftops. "Let her have her story," Dr. Chan had said. "You have yours, and yours is the one you actually have to live with. So Emily let it go, stopped checking the blog, stopped caring what Rachel told the internet about their relationship. It was a kind of freedom, that not caring, the recognition that other people's opinions couldn't change the reality of what had happened, couldn't make Emily responsible for choices she hadn't made, couldn't touch the life she had built in the aftermath. That life was good now. Genuinely good in ways that had nothing to do with accomplishments or acquisitions but everything to do with peace. Emily woke up in the mornings next to someone who loved her without conditions, went to work where she was valued and challenged and paid fairly, came home to a house that felt like sanctuary rather than just shelter. She had friends who called just to talk, who invited her to things because they enjoyed her company, who remembered her birthday and showed up when she needed help moving furniture, and generally existed in her life as chosen family, the kind that mattered more than blood. She volunteered at a women's shelter on weekends, helping residents with resume building and job search strategies, using her skills to give other women paths toward financial independence. It was meaningful work, the kind that reminded her that her story of escaping family dysfunction wasn't unique, that there were people everywhere making hard choices to protect themselves, to build lives that were safe and stable in their own. One of the women she had worked with, a woman named Sarah who had left an abusive family system similar to Emily's, had hugged her at graduation from the shelter's program and said, "Thank you for showing me it was possible. For being proof that you can walk away and still be okay, still build something beautiful." Emily had cried, had felt the weight of that gratitude while also recognizing that she hadn't saved anyone, had just been visible in her own journey in a way that happened to be helpful to someone else. As the sun finished setting and the yard fell into twilight, Daniel squeezed Emily gently. "Are you hungry? I was thinking about trying that new Thai place for dinner." "That sounds perfect," Emily said, turning in his arms to face him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being steady. For not needing me to be anyone other than who I am. For being the kind of family I didn't know existed." Daniel kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made Emily's chest ache in the best possible way. "You made that possible, you know. By choosing yourself first. By knowing your worth. I didn't save you, Em. You saved yourself. And then you let me walk beside you." They went inside hand in hand, the house warm and welcoming, filled with the life they had built together. In the kitchen, Emily noticed the calendar on the wall, marked with upcoming events: a concert they were attending, a friend's baby shower, a weekend trip to the coast they had been planning. A life full of future, of possibility, of things to look forward to rather than things to dread. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, an email notification. She glanced at it automatically, saw it was from an unknown address, the subject line reading, "Please read this, it's important." Emily felt the old anxiety spike, the instinctive fear that her family had found a new way to contact her, to drag her back into their chaos. But then she took a breath, used the grounding technique she had learned, reminded herself that she had choices. She could read it or delete it, engage or ignore, let it affect her evening or protect her peace. After a moment's consideration, she deleted it without opening it. If it was genuinely important, if it was something she actually needed to know, it would reach her through legitimate channels. If it was just more manipulation, more attempts to provoke guilt or obligation, she didn't need to invite that energy into her life. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, watching her face. "Everything's fine," Emily said, and meant it. "Just deleting something that doesn't deserve my attention." That ability, that simple act of choosing what deserved her time and energy and emotional labor, was perhaps the greatest gift her estrangement had given her. She had learned to prioritize herself without guilt, to protect her peace without apology, to understand that saying no to things that harmed her was saying yes to things that nourished her. 6 months later, Emily found out she was pregnant. The news was both thrilling and terrifying, bringing up all the questions she had been managing about parenting and patterns, and whether she was capable of giving a child what they needed when she hadn't received it herself. But she and Daniel worked through those fears together, with therapy and research and long conversations about what kind of parents they wanted to be, what values they wanted to instill, what it meant to raise a child with both love and boundaries. When their daughter was born, a tiny perfect human they named Luna, Emily understood something fundamental and life-changing. She understood that this was family too, this small person who depended on her completely, who she would protect fiercely, who she would love without condition but also raise with boundaries and respect and the understanding that love didn't mean unlimited access or unlimited obligation. She understood that the family she had been born into had taught her valuable lessons, even if those lessons had come through pain. They had taught her what not to do, how not to treat people you claimed to love, what conditional love looked like so she could recognize and reject it. They had taught her that walking away was sometimes the bravest choice, that loyalty to yourself was just as important as loyalty to others, that you couldn't pour from an empty cup no matter how much people demanded it. And they had taught her, though they never intended to, that family was a choice. Not just in who you let in but in how you showed up, what you prioritized, how you loved. Emily chose to be the kind of parent who celebrated her daughter's independence rather than punishing it, who supported her dreams even when they were different from Emily's, who would never make love contingent on obedience or access contingent on compliance. She chose to be family in the way she wished her family had been, to break cycles rather than perpetuate them, to give Luna the gift of unconditional love and healthy boundaries and the security of knowing she mattered just because she existed, not because of what she could provide. Years passed. Luna grew from infant to toddler to child, curious and bright and unencumbered by the weight Emily had carried at her age. Emily's career continued to flourish, Daniel's business expanded. They bought a bigger house with a yard where Luna could play, adopted a dog who became Luna's best friend and constant companion. Emily never heard from her family again. She didn't know if they were still in California, still struggling with debt, still blaming her for everything that had gone wrong. She didn't Google them anymore, didn't check for news or updates, didn't maintain even that distant vigilance. They had become truly separate, two trajectories that had diverged completely, no longer intersecting even in Emily's thoughts except as historical context, the before that made the after more meaningful. On the 10th anniversary of that dinner, Emily was in her home office working on a presentation when Luna, now 9 years old, came in with a question about family trees for a school project. "Mom, do I have grandparents? Other kids have grandparents who come to their concerts and stuff, but I've never met yours." Emily took a breath, thought about how to answer honestly without burdening her daughter with adult complications. "You have Daniel's parents who you call Nana and Papa. My biological parents and I aren't in touch. We had a disagreement many years ago, before you were born, and decided it was healthier for us to be separate." "Did they do something bad?" Luna asked, her face serious, trying to understand. "They made choices that hurt me, and I made a choice to protect myself. Sometimes families don't work out the way we hope they will. But that's okay because we get to choose our family too. You have Nana and Papa, and Aunt Amanda and Uncle James, and all the people who love you and show up for you. That's family." Luna considered this, then nodded. "Okay. Can I put Daniel's parents on my family tree then?" "Absolutely," Emily said, relieved and grateful that her daughter's biggest concern was filling out a school project, not processing complex family trauma. "They'll be thrilled." After Luna left, Emily sat in her office thinking about family trees and how they were supposed to represent roots, stability, belonging. Her family tree had broken branches, had been pruned deliberately, had been reshaped into something healthier even if it was smaller. And that was okay. That was more than okay. That was survival and growth, and the refusal to let poison roots infect new growth. She thought about the girl she had been 10 years ago, sitting at that dinner table, hearing the word no form in her mouth and wondering if she had the courage to say it. She thought about how that single word, that boundary, had cost her her family but had given her herself. She thought about the price and the gain and understood finally completely that it had been worth it. Not because her family was evil or unredeemable, not because she was glad they had suffered consequences, not because estrangement was inherently superior to reconciliation, but because she had been drowning and they had been the weight pulling her under. And sometimes survival means letting go of people you love, people who love you in their way but whose love is too heavy to carry and stay afloat. Emily stood up, stretched, looked out the window at her yard where Daniel was teaching Luna to ride a bike without training wheels, both of them laughing as she wobbled and recovered, learning balance through practice and patience and the safety of knowing someone was there to catch her if she fell. That was family. That was what it was supposed to look like. That was what Emily had found when she finally stopped looking backward and allowed herself to look forward. She went downstairs and outside, joined her husband and daughter in the yard, cheered when Luna made it all the way to the fence without falling, hugged her when she crashed and got back up determined to try again. In that moment, in the spring sunshine with grass stains on knees and laughter in the air, Emily felt something she had never quite felt before. Complete. Not despite her family's absence, but because of it. Because she had made space for this, for joy unencumbered by obligation, for love without conditions, for the kind of family you choose and build and protect rather than the kind you're born into and expected to endure. The past would always be part of her story, those chapters written in pain and confusion and eventual clarity. But it was just the beginning, the foundation that the rest of her life was built upon, not despite its cracks but because of what she had learned while patching them. She had learned that you could survive the loss of your family of origin and build a family of choice. She had learned that boundaries were not punishments but protections. She had learned that the bravest thing you could do was save yourself, even when everyone around you was insisting you should drown to save them instead. And most importantly, she had learned that freedom wasn't the absence of connection, but the presence of connection that nourished rather than depleted, that added to your life rather than extracting from it, that let you breathe deeply instead of holding your breath waiting for the next crisis, the next demand, the next impossible choice between your family and yourself. Emily watched her daughter ride that bike in wobbly circles, watched Daniel steady her when she needed it and let go when she didn't, watched the evening light turn everything golden and perfect and real. She felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful, gratitude for the people present and for the people absent, for the family she had lost and for the family she had found, for the journey that had led here and for the life that stretched ahead. This was enough. This was everything. This was the freedom she had been searching for all along, the peace she had paid for with the hardest currency she had, the life she deserved and had finally, mercifully, claimed as her own. The sun set on another day, and Emily Chen, no longer defined by the family that had rejected her but by the family she had chosen, went inside to make dinner, to read bedtime stories, to live the ordinary extraordinary life of someone who had saved herself and discovered that salvation was just the beginning of a much better story.